Welcome back. I'm Peter. This is Perfect Pizza at Home, and I'm going to show you in this lesson how to make dough, my favorite part of the pizza process. Of course, you know, dough pizza has sauce, it has other ingredients, but I think the key to a great and memorable pizza is always the crust. The thing is that there's controversy as to what is the best crust, what's the best way to make it, what's the best kind of pizza. So I'm going to show you 4 different kinds of doughs in this lesson, all slightly different but very similar. We're going to show you, and you'll be able to get those recipes right off of the course material. What I'm going to make now is the Neapolitan, or what we call the American style pizza dough. And again, I'm using bread flour. I still need a little bit more flour. I need 22.5 ounces for this, which will be, if you don't have a scale, which I happen to have here, about 5 cups. But weighing the ingredients is always more accurate. I still need about 1.5 ounces of flour, so I'm going to put it on my scale. And there we go. I'm going to take this flour and put it right in a mixer. Now, you don't have to use an electric mixer if you don't have one, if you prefer going by hand. I do. I like to mix my doughs by hand. Any kind of electric mixer will do the job, but when you have a mixer like this one, which has a paddle attachment, that's what we're going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and put this paddle on. If you don't have a paddle attachment and you only have a dough hook, you can still mix the dough with the hook. It just takes a little bit longer. The paddle brings everything together very quickly. We have a few more ingredients to put in here. And again, I've measured these now, and I've given you the measurements on your course materials, both in spoons, teaspoons, and tablespoons, as well as in weights. But when you have small ingredients, sometimes the scales don't register it. It's okay to use a tablespoon or a teaspoon. So we've got sugar. And if you prefer to use honey, you can use honey. You can even use agave if you'd like. Salt. You could use kosher salt or regular table salt. The amount varies in terms of weight. It will be the same in teaspoons. It will always be a little more if you're using finer ground salt. Instant yeast. And the instant yeast is preferable to the active dry yeast only because you can add it directly to the flour and it will dissolve instantly. That's why it's called instant yeast. Not because it's faster, but because it's instant. Now, the substitutions for using active dry yeast, for those of you who would prefer to use that, are given in your course material. These are all our dry ingredients. I'm just going to go ahead and stir those up a little bit so that the yeast and the salt are buried in the flour. I don't like the yeast and the salt to sit on top of each other until all the ingredients, the wet ingredients, get in there, because the flour will now buffer them. I have water, pre-measured, approximately 2 cups. And again, depending on where you're making your pizza dough, in dry climates you might need a little bit more. If you are using a different brand of flour than me, you might need less. But we start with a ballpark of 2 cups, 16 ounces, and a little bit of olive oil just to tenderize it. So I'm going to pour in my water, put it all in, don't put it in gradually. I'm going to put my oil in right now as well. And I'm going to start mixing on slow speed. I also have a little bit of extra water always standing by, always extra flour, extra water, just in case you have to make adjustments. This will not take long. Approximately 1 minute is all you need. I'm going to add a little bit of water here. Let me show you why. If I lift this up, you can see that the dough is very coarse and still shaggy. It's only been mixing for about 30 seconds. The gluten hasn't really had a chance to develop. All of the water hasn't been fully hydrated. It feels pretty close to being what I want, but I felt that it needed just a little bit more water. You're going to have to feel your way into this, but it'll be easier to tell after it mixes a little bit longer. So I'm going to put it back down. I'm going to turn it back on. We'll lock this in. And now I can actually kick it up to a second speed. And that'll just bring it together a little bit faster. At this stage, the dough's been mixing for approximately 1 minute. The flour's been fully hydrated. It should give me enough information to know if I need to make any more adjustments. So I'm going to stop the mixer. If you're mixing by hand, you do all this with a spoon and you do the exact same adjustments. Now, if we look at this dough, I'm going to put some water on my hand so it doesn't stick. The dough feels a little bit stiff to me. When we're mixing dough, we're looking for 3 things. We're looking for the ingredients to be evenly distributed. We're activating the yeast, and we did that as soon as the yeast got wet, which it did when we added the water. This yeast woke up and started to activate. That's why we call it instant yeast, and that's what's happening. It's instantly activating. We won't see the results of that for a while, but finally we want to develop the gluten. And you can see if I pull this dough, it's not really holding together, but we can see little strands of protein trying to hold it together. That is the gluten starting to develop. It takes approximately 5 minutes for that to really take place. But we've mixed long enough at this point to where everything is hydrated. There's no loose flour left in the mixer. So we can actually let this dough sit for 5 minutes. I'm going to put it back in the bowl. I'll just turn it on for 1 second just to kind of gather it together. We're going to let it sit for 5 minutes just to rest, to fully hydrate. And when we come back, we'll be able to mix this on a higher speed for maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and it will be done. And if it stiffens up, we'll add a little bit more water to it then. So you can see now, after 5 minutes, the dough looks pretty much the same at this point. Let's see if there's any more gluten development. Even without mixing, gluten will develop. There's two proteins, gliadin and glutenin, that bond, and they need that time. You can see the dough's a little bit stronger. It's actually holding together, but it's not organized. So we're going to put this dough back in the mixer. I'm going to turn it on a medium speed, and in just a few seconds, this gluten pattern will form up kind of like almost like a tapestry will weave itself into a stronger, smoother dough. It looks like it might be able to handle one little splash extra of water, and this is something you just kind of feel your way into. As we said earlier, every brand of flour either needs a little more water or a little more flour, and I'm looking really for the dough to tell me what it needs. And you can see now, as I lift this dough out, we're going to have a much stronger dough. It's still going to look a little shaggy until I move it to the work surface, but with a little bit of water on my hand to keep it from sticking, I'm going to pull off a piece, and let's look at this gluten development. And you can see now how much stronger this dough is. I'm actually able to pull it. It's holding together, and it's making what we call a window pane. And all of you who have made bread know how to do this window pane test, because it's pretty fundamental to all bread making, and pizza dough is just another type of bread dough. But you see now it's pretty strong, but it's still a little bit weak. We're going to change that right now by transferring this dough out of the mixer. I've got the texture just where I want it as far as hydration. It's tacky, but it's not super sticky. But we want it to be soft and very, very supple. And we're going to transfer this now to the work surface. I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil, just enough to make an oil slick. I'm going to kind of spread this out. I want this to be a nice slick area. A lot of bakers like to use flour at this stage. I don't want more flour going into my dough. I want to keep this dough very soft, supple, even a little bit sticky. So we're going to use, with oily hands, now I can get it all off the paddle. And again, if you're using a dough hook, it's the same process, but you might have to mix for maybe 3 minutes instead of 1 minute at each of the various stages, because it takes longer for the hook to gather all the ingredients. Even in the few seconds that it's taken to get to this stage, the dough is getting stronger and stronger because the gluten is actually developing more, but what it hasn't completely finished doing is organizing itself. And so we're going to do that by hand by using a technique that we showed in our artisan bread making course called the stretch and fold. Use a bowl scraper to get all this dough out of the mixer. This is a really valuable tool. You can use this for almost every step of the process. And the nice thing is it's the least expensive tool in your kitchen. Put this aside, and again, our dough looks very coarse and shaggy at this stage, but watch what happens when we do one stretch and fold. I'm going to just pat this dough down. It's really already soft and supple, but it's not smooth. I'm going to fold it by stretching it in 4 directions. One direction like that, give it a turn, and stretch it again, and flip it over. And look how much the dough has changed just from one stretch and fold. It's even firmer now. And I can pick it up and it feels stronger. And yet it's still very, very supple. And that's what we want. Now what we're going to do is cover this with a bowl. And I'm going to do this 3 more times for a grand total of 4 stretch and folds at 5-minute intervals. And if you can, go longer, if it takes 20 minutes to get back to the dough, that's okay. If you get there quicker in 3 minutes, that's okay. But we'll do this 3 more times, 4 total, and in the end, this dough will be perfectly smooth, ready to go to the next stage. Okay, we'll do a second one. Stretch it, fold it, quarter turn, stretch it, fold it, flip it over, again, stronger. You can even tighten it at this point. Here's our third stretch and fold, and I want you to notice how quickly this goes. You do not need to overwork it. A lot of people tend to kind of like start kneading the dough again. They want to keep working it. There's no advantage to that really at this stage. It won't ruin the dough by mixing it longer, but you really don't need to do it. We're just trying to get this dough to be very, very bouncy. And the steps are quick and easy. You could do 4 of these. If you forget and lose your count and do 5, no harm done. If you only do 3, the dough will still work. But 4 we have found, through trial and error, to be the ideal number of stretch and folds to get the most sort of bounce from your dough when you bake it later in the process. We've got 1 more to do, and then we're going to put it away till tomorrow when we make the pizzas. So we've got 1 final stretch and fold to do. And you can see each time I do this, the dough gets a little stronger and a little smoother. So this dough is now ready. It's strong. Let's even do another window pane test just to see how much more organized the gluten has become. When I tug on it now, this dough gives me a lot of resistance. I should be able to get a very clear, translucent film of dough through here, just a membrane of dough that lets light shine through. There you go. You can see that light shining through it. We know that the gluten is fully developed. It'll support even my finger at this stage. That's how strong the gluten development is. Now we have some choices to make with this dough. We can put the dough away in a bowl overnight and just let it ferment very slowly. The key to great pizza dough is long, slow, cold fermentation. Or we can pre-divide this into dough balls and either put it in the refrigerator ready to go tomorrow, or even in freezer bags and put them in the freezer for future use. If we pre-divide it, and I want to show you how to do that, get a scale or else divide this dough ball into either 4 or 5 even pieces. 5 pieces will get you close to about 8 ounces of dough, which is an ideal size for home pizza making. If you're up to 9 ounces, or if you're down to 7 ounces, not a problem. But I'm going to cut off an 8-ounce dough ball here and weigh it. Oh, that's just slightly over. I'm going to take just a tiny little piece off, but now I have, yep, 8 ounces right there. That's 8 ounces. And normally if I'm doing this fast, I'm not going to sweat if I'm a little over, a little under. I just want to get those pieces fairly close to each other in size. The rest of this dough, let's put this one away for overnight. So I'm going to put a little bit of oil in a bowl, not a lot, just oil so that the dough will be easy to get it out tomorrow. You can also use a pan spray or like an olive oil pan spray, and you can spray it in with that. I'm going to take this dough, form it into a smooth ball. Again, it's almost like stretch and folding it, but you're just stretching it to get it smooth. Pinch the bottom closed. I'm going to kind of put it in there to get some oil on that surface and put this dough in here, cover it with plastic wrap, and this can immediately go into the refrigerator. You do not need to wait for it to rise like you would for bread dough, because it will rise in the refrigerator as it chills down. It takes about an hour, hour and a half for the dough to cool down to about 40 degrees. So this dough will rise overnight, and then tomorrow we can subdivide it and make it into dough balls. But this piece will be one that we would like to maybe put in the freezer or have ready to go tomorrow. So I'm going to put it again just on the oil spot just so it's easy to handle, and stretch it out like that, kind of creating a tight surface tension. Pinch that bottom closed, and I've got myself a dough ball. And I can put this dough ball on a sheet pan that's been lightly oiled, on a piece of parchment or a silicone pad that's been just lightly sprayed, misted with oil, again, so it will come off easily tomorrow. Mist the top with some oil so that the plastic doesn't stick to it. You can either cover it with plastic wrap, you can put it inside a big plastic bag, put it in the refrigerator or in the freezer, depending on what you want to do with this. This piece will save, and tomorrow we'll turn it into a pizza on our Neapolitan or American-style Neapolitan pizza dough. Now, I just want to show you by comparison what this looks like compared to the other 3 doughs that you're going to make. It's very similar to our true Napolitano dough, which I've also already made, and I have some put aside. This is the same size dough ball after it's been sitting overnight, and you can see that it looks almost identical because it has almost the same ingredients, but this dough doesn't have sugar, it doesn't have oil. It's just a plain flour, water, salt, and yeast dough. So you want to make sure you label these so you know which ones are which when you're doing them. But the texture of this dough is very similar to the texture of this dough. It's soft and supple. You should be able to get that window pane. It should be easy to stretch. And we'll turn this into a pizza in an upcoming lesson. Here is the country dough. Again, very similar, but with 25% whole grain flour, and that can be whole wheat or rye, and the rest is bread flour. The same supple quality, really soft. This one has also been already fermenting overnight, so it could be turned into a pizza at any point, and we'll turn this into a pizza in an upcoming lesson. You can see the difference in color. We call this a country dough because the whole grain flour gives it those earth tones and gives it that feeling of being a little bit more rustic, a little more country. Now, the most different of all the doughs is our Sicilian dough. And the Sicilian dough is only different not because it has different ingredients, because it only has 5 ingredients: flour, water, salt, yeast, and oil, but because it has the most water, a much higher hydration rate. And I'm going to pull this out and you will see again how wet this dough is compared to the others. It's so wet that if I didn't have oil on my hands, it would stick to my hands, and it can really go all over the place. I could make pizza out of this. It's harder because it is so soft and supple and sticky to make a regular standard pizza, but by putting it into a pan, Sicilian style, or into a larger pan for focaccia, you can actually let the pan hold the dough in place. So again, it looks very similar to these doughs, only difference is hydration. The performance is different, the way it bakes, the way it tastes. All these things are affected by the choices we've made in these ingredients, but the mixing techniques are all the same. So we will turn all these doughs into pizzas, but of course we're also going to have to make toppings. We've got to get ready to bring this forward to the next stage, and we'll do that in an upcoming lesson. So make sure you use the Craftsy platform to discuss amongst yourselves these doughs. If you're having any problems, share the information, take pictures, put it out there for everybody to kind of chime in. You can help each other to get this right, and especially as you have successes, make sure that you tell people how you got there. I'm Peter Reinhardt. I'll see you in the next lesson when we make toppings and we start to go forward to our perfect pizza. This is Perfect Pizza at Home.